clearly the media knew that the first casualty, and I actually liked the initial response. They're like, the greatest loser wasn't Kamala. The greatest loser was the media, because starting with Biden, they just kind of gathered this belief in that they had this power to like choose presidents and get to dictate how long they get to serve and their relationship with the people. And that was totally destroyed. Kamala had every endorsement from every media organization, every celebrity. You had, the whole Taylor Swift situation. Like, it was just a perfect repudiation of just this far left media, like elite culture. I don't know. I was extremely happy and like overjoyed by the results.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the media have always positioned themselves as kingmakers. I think they have a tacit self understanding of being the quote watchdogs of justice, the watchdogs of democracy. And that may be true when you're doing your job well, that you can call out malfeasance if you see it. But the way that position works is to basically expose the possible um, obstructions to the public, and then allow the public to make the judgments. But if the violations aren't there, then the public isn't going to judge the way you think they're going to judge. You can't just label it that way. You actually have to make a case like anyone else.
Well, they are watchdogs. They are watchdogs. It's just that they had migrated from watchdogs to then reporting the malfeasance, to then selectively reporting malfeasance, to then sort of like being like, oh, well, then creating malfeasance, and then like somewhere they're like, oh, we're just kingmakers, and that was never the point of the media.
Right.
Right. And there's one thing, and we can talk about it more if we want to, but in a political system, there's a creedal aspect, the ideas and the institutions that define that political system, but then there's the culture. So there's creed and there's culture. And my perception is that the media, today's media, saw themselves as not just the defenders of the institutions and the ideas, which they weren't that good at anyways, but they were trying to enforce a certain culture. In one sense, kind of just a post-war liberal culture that had grown up over the last 40, 50 years, and then has metastasized into this kind of postmodern, kind of nihilistic culture. And they see themselves as, they've kind of conflated the American system with this unbridled individualism rooted deeply in kind of a nihilistic view of the world. And they were trying to enforce it, like shove it down the American populace's throats. And so I think that's where people are like, whoa, wait a second, what happened to common sense? And if you looked at the Republican platform, the very words common sense showed up multiple times. And I think that's part of the driving force of the resistance to the media culture, is just, hey, can we get back to common sense and don't try to impose this kind of postmodern nihilistic culture on the entire country.
Alternative media played a big part in this election cycle as well. And many people will point to Trump's use of Twitter, allowing maybe other voices, dissident voices. And Elon, in the weeks leading up to the election, boasted how Twitter was still the number one source for news across the nation. This is the place where everybody would go to get their updates. Secondly, of course, was the marked appearance of both President Trump and Vice President-elect Vance on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is a long podcast. It's a 3-hour program, and you have to have a discussion. One of the interesting things about the Joe Rogan program is you can't hide behind scripted talking points. He's going to ask probing questions. He seems to do so honestly. He's with a fair and inquisitive mind. He's not trying to necessarily trap people. He's gonna ask you if your positions, contradict themselves or things like that. But it seems to be a fair discussion, and a lot of people trusted that source over what they heard, say, Kamala say to an ABC News interviewer or something to that effect, because they don't know what's been edited. They can't see it. And she, of course, refused to go on. So here's an interesting idea that alt media is now starting to pick up the mantle of what traditional media used to do. And I had heard more than one person said that they were undecided until they heard Trump on Rogan.
Oh, interesting.
And that made a difference to a couple of individual voters. I don't know how big that swing becomes, but I think that's interesting that media outlet now takes on more prominence.
Yeah, I think that's true, and you see that, and so we're undergoing this shift over time of a transition from what some people call the legacy media and then the new media, and I think that was only accelerated in this election with, again, like you said, the role of Joe Rogan, the role of Twitter, Elon Musk. That legacy media cannot keep a lid on the control of information, and that's going to have ramifications for politics. Is a large part of politics is being able to communicate the message you want to communicate without a filter. And for a long time, modern media has acted as the filter between the people and the politician, and that filter is kind of breaking down, and it is going to have, and it's having political ramifications.